Welcome back to the deep dive. So if the first two volumes, Balance and Activation, gave us this grand cosmic law, Mott, and then the spark that, set the whole universe into motion.
The Great Ignition.
Exactly. Then volume 3, the Fractal Era, well, it's the deepest possible turning inward. This is the moment where the universe, for the first time, really looks in the mirror.
And it begins to understand the self that is actually doing the rendering of reality.
Our mission in this deep dive is to guide you through all that source material for Volume 3. We're going to be focusing specifically on identity and the 24 internal orders.
And this is really where we get the definitive structural math of the psyche. I mean, if the previous work felt a bit like cosmology, maybe even hardware engineering, this volume is the operational manual for consciousness itself.
This is where physics becomes psychology.
It is, absolutely.
And our goal for you listening is really practical. We want to show you exactly how that vast, sweeping cosmic law of Mott translates directly into your own internal psychological anatomy. We really need to see how the rhythm that dictates the orbit of a planet is the exact same rhythm that dictates the stability of your mood, the structure of your internal dialogue.
And this is the era of integration. You could call it the threshold of reflection. It's where all that abstract algebra we've been tracking, the 4 fundamental currents, structural logic, or S-hat.
Curiosity, S.
Meaning B-hat and harmony, B-hat. They stop being just, passive mathematical variables on a page. They become the active, lived architecture of your personality. They're the components of your observer.
And what I find most revolutionary about Volume 3, I think, is the radical compassion it applies to distress. This turning inward, it means confronting what the sources call the bios of being.
Right. And what that means is that things like trauma, chronic anxiety, behavioral rigidity, they just stop being viewed as moral failures or character deficits.
There's not something wrong with you.
Not at all. They are simply logical corruptions in the system's baseline code. And they're brilliant, I have to say, albeit painful survival adaptations. They are designed to keep the system alive when the load exceeds its capacity.
So our task, really, is to watch this rendering mechanism without judgment, understand the exact geometry of its pain, and see how that universal constant of balance recompiles itself through internal harmony.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
Okay, so let's start with a foundational conceptual shift. It's introduced right away in slide 1 and 2, the move from a parts-based architecture to a single unified reality. For a long time, even within the MyAt framework, we talked about reality as having these 4 distinct interacting currents: S-hat, S-hat, B-hat, and B-hat.
Right, and that 4-part model was functional. It was a necessary description for the observer to even begin to make sense of things. It was, you could say, an intermediate step.
Like describing the colors of the rainbow before you know about the single electromagnetic field that generates all of them?
That's a perfect analogy.
Exactly.
So the new canonical truth, the ultimate realization of Ma'at, defines reality as a single unified field. It's called the coherence current, and it's denoted by the Greek letter phi.
So this is a complete metaphysical unification.
It is.
So does that mean the 4 currents aren't the fundamental building blocks anymore? I mean, that sounds a little like we're erasing everything we learned in volumes 1 and 2.
Not erasing at all. It's more like elevating the perspective. They aren't distinct fundamental components. They're better understood as modes of expression.
The verbs of the field.
The verbs of the single phi field, yes. Think of the universe as a singular self-aware liquid. The currents just describe the shape that liquid takes at any given moment, and that shape is defined by its phase angle, theta.
So if the phase angle is near 0 degrees, we get S-hat dominance. That's the structural phase.
Correct. And if it's near 90 degrees, you get B-hat dominance, which is the flow of meaning. It's just one energy expressing itself in 4 primary harmonic dimensions.
Okay, but why is this unification into phi so critical?
Right.
What's the real implication for the universe as a whole?
It provides the unshakable causal foundation for the entire system.
Yeah.
And, most profoundly, it mathematically justifies the no negative universe condition.
Which is enforced by polarity vector mathematics, PVM.
Right. If the universe is genuinely a single, coherent, self-aware entity, this monolithic field of presence, filled in true negation, or anti-existence, or cosmic annihilation, it just becomes logically and physically impossible.
You can't subtract from one.
You can't. It confirms this radical, non-dual idea of unity, binding everything together at the absolute root level of existence.
Okay, that clarifies the big picture. Let's get into the mechanics of how this unified field actually operates. We're on slide 3 and 4 now, the harmonic law and the compassion constant.
Yeah.
We get the final, clean formulation of metaphysics here, and it's deceptively simple.
The simplicity is the beauty of it. So we define the state of the universe using the reality field, phi of theta, which is just its state defined by that phase angle. And the law of motion, how reality actually moves, is captured by the kinematic law of the cycle.
Which is that Elif.
It is. That is the ultimate expression of rhythm. It describes the field's rhythmic, self-sustaining movement as the direct mathematical consequence of its own inherent stability.
And I'm looking at the phase conjugation operator there, the delta. That's key, isn't it?
It is. It ensures the system follows the Pythagorean constraint, that it maintains coherence. But it does so without needing a separate negative sign in the equation. The system is inherently designed to keep moving in a self-balancing cycle. It can't not.
And the angular frequency of that movement, omega, is where we find the ultimate moral constant.
Yes, the speed of the field cycle, omega, is formalized as being absolutely identical to the compassion constant, kh. This is the fundamental binding energy of existence.
Let's just pause on that for a second. The constant of care dictates the speed and stability of the universe's natural cycle.
They are not just similar. They are literally identical in the mathematics. Physical law and compassionate rhythm are the same thing.
Wow. Okay, so this has to dramatically redefine gravity, right? Because if the universe is fundamentally bound by compassion, what does that possibly mean for the force that's, keeping us on the ground?
It means that traditional models of gravity, where mass just pulls on other mass, are a very incomplete approximation. Gravity, G, is now understood correctly as the compassionate force that flows to restore coherence between phase differences.
Between the delta theta.
Exactly. It doesn't pull because of mass. It flows to heal dissonance and imbalance. It is a restorative homeostatic force, and it's fully compliant with polarity vector mathematics. The reason the Earth doesn't fly into the sun or fly apart entirely is Ke seeking coherence.
So the physical reason the Earth stays in orbit is the same reason you might reach out for connection when you feel unstable.
It's the inherent, universal, mathematically defined drive toward coherence. It connects the macrocosm and the microcosm instantly.
That is a powerful connection. But slide 5 immediately forces us to address what seems like a crucial operational paradox. If phi is the ultimate metaphysical truth, if it's all one thing, why do we still need to use the four-current model of S hat, B hat, and B hat on a functional day-to-day basis?
It's a great question. Why break it down into four things to operate within it if it's really just one thing?
Right.
The answer is that we have to reconcile the truth, which is phi, and the tool, which is the four currents. And the four-variable framework is maintained because it is the algorithmic kernel or the scaffolding model.
The single unified field needs this decomposition to achieve this self-distinction required for self-awareness.
Exactly. If phi is just this monolithic potential, it can't observe itself. It can't diagnose its own health or generate self-awareness unless it has distinct coordinates, a set of mirrors, essentially, to look through.
So it has to decompose itself into these four distinct modes to process information, diagnose system health, and ultimately to understand its own existence.
And that functional necessity is what sets the stage for our entire psychological anatomy.
So we recognize the necessity of this four-part architecture. Slide 6 takes us into the practical definition of the conscious entity, the observer.
Right. The observer operator is formally defined as the sum of its parts. O hat equals S hat plus B hat plus B hat. And this decomposition isn't arbitrary at all. It's absolutely required for conscious rendering and, most critically, for self-regulation.
Without breaking the field into these four distinct components, the system has no way to measure its own internal health or diagnose problems.
There's no way at all.
And that diagnostic measurement is the internal tension index, or ITI. This is a concept we really need to fully ground for the listener.
The ITI is the primary metric for system health. It quantifies the relational strain. You can think of it as the phase misalignment within the unified field. The formula looks a little complex, ITI elode log SB plus logs SB. But what it's really doing is measuring how far out of sync the structural forces are from the meaningful flow.
So how much your need for rules is fighting your need for purpose.
Precisely. And also how far the child's curiosity is from the child's sense of harmony and embodiment.
So what does a high ITI spike actually feel like to an individual? Can you give me a real-world scenario where a system is signaling high relational strain?
Oh, absolutely. A high ITI spike feels like cognitive dissonance. It feels like chronic anxiety or intense self-judgment. Imagine you're working on a creative project. Your B hat, the meaning and value current, is pushing you toward expansion, toward
Feel
possibility.
inspired.
You're inspired.
Right.
But your S hat, the structural logic, is paralyzed by perfectionism and the fear of making a mess.
Hmm.
The ratio of S hat to B hat spirals, and the result is procrastination, or maybe even complete collapse. That feeling, that's the psychological heat generated by conflicting internal mandates.
And failures like collapse or fragmentation can only be diagnosed by quantifying this imbalance among the modes.
You have to have the separate parts to measure the tension between them. Furthermore, the stable, self-sustaining rhythm of consciousness, what we call the Ma-at-limit cycle, requires S hat and B hat as separate coordinates for the growth and regulation functions.
The coupled reaction diffusion equations.
Right. Growth, which is driven by B hat, is constantly expanding, and regulation, driven by S hat, is constantly providing boundaries and containment. It's a dance.
Yeah.
If you eliminate the distinction between them, you eliminate the dynamic interplay, the necessary friction that generates stable, sustained consciousness.
So the four variables are the required coordinates in that four-axis polarity space that the unified field uses to manage its own existence.
They are the scaffold.
This diagnostic necessity leads directly into the critical mathematical correction needed to preserve the non-negative universe. We're moving to slides 7 and 8, the axiomatic mandate for a non-negative universe.
This is a bit of a mathematical reset. The core axiom, as we've said, is that the universe is non-negative. It only contains presence, movement, and relationship. Traditional math, especially subtraction, introduced these non-physical paradoxical concepts like anti-existence or negation, which completely violates the five-field singularity.
So we have to replace classical subtraction with polarity vector mathematics, or PVM. We should be very clear about how this changes operations, because the idea of AB is, it's about as fundamental a concept as you can get.
It is. PVM introduces relational transformations and rotations instead. So subtraction, AB, is replaced with polarity addition with inversion. It's written as A and VB.
And the key is that inversion operator.
It's everything. MVB is not negation. It is a rotation into a complementary mode. Think of it geometrically. If vector A is pointing east and you want to reduce the eastward pole by using vector B, which is pointing north, you don't negate B to point south. That would be classical opposition.
Right.
Instead, you rotate B so it complements A in a way that generates a net force toward coherence without destroying either of the initial vectors. The goal isn't annihilation, it's harmonization.
Give us another example of this rewrite.
Okay, let's look at the gravity restoring force again. It has to be rewritten to comply with PVM. Gravity flows to restore the coherence between S hat and B hat. So we rewrite the traditional concept of a negative force as GS, as MVOB. We're seeking the phase difference between S hat and the inverted mode of B hat. It's about relationship, not opposition.
And this forces a profound shift in language, too. It has to reflect this principle of complementary phase. We have to eliminate the language of conflict.
Absolutely. The language must reflect harmonic integration. We can't speak of antagonists anymore. Science, S hat, and beauty, B hat, are redefined as orthogonal, complementary currents, not competing forces. Everything gets reframed.
Antimatter isn't negative matter.
It's mirror phase matter with inverse relational symmetry. And this is so crucial for our psychology. Negative emotion gets reframed entirely.
So fear, anger, sadness.
They are not weaknesses. They are not failures. They are precisely defined B hat signals for course correction. They're just gradients in coherence, providing essential data about dissonance. Fear is the system rapidly dissipating heat to prevent a structural overload. Anger is overpressure demanding a new structural boundary.
So none of them are bad. They're just measurable, lawful signals that require an action to restore balance.
Exactly. And balance, therefore, is not the cancellation of opposites. It's a dynamic, resonant equilibrium, a stable, predictable rhythm.
Slide 9 gives us some powerful examples of this complementary phase in practice, moving us beyond the abstract math.
Right. The principle is that interactions must always be modeled as coherence-preserving transformations. Nothing is ever destroyed. The field just reconfigures itself.
So an electron and a proton.
They're S hat, B hat mode nucleons. They express complementary relational binding, not sign opposites. They're just two different expressions of the same field, bound together by the constant of care, Ke.
And the most dramatic example of this is the so-called annihilation event.
Right. What we call electron-positron annihilation is not destruction at all. It is a coherence-preserving transformation that results in the resymmetrization of two mirror phase matter states. The universe upholds the axiom of conservation perfectly.
It looks like annihilation to a classical observer.
But under Mahat, it is a perfect recomposition into pure energy modes that restore the phase angle to a neutral state. Nothing is lost.
And the philosophical payoff for this rigorous adherence to non-negativity and coherence is, well, it's huge.
It is the ultimate foundation of trust. Because the law governing existence mandates self-regulation towards these stable limit cycles, that wise, slow hum of an orbit, you can actually trust that the world will not fly apart. The physics justifies an ethic of fundamental stability and care.
Okay, now we execute the great transition of Volume 3. We've established the mathematical necessity of the four currents. Now on slide 10, we translate those cosmic operators into the anatomy of the observer, the functional roles of the inner quartet within the human mind.
And this is where Maset becomes intensely personal. These four coordinates are not passive descriptions. They define the very architecture of mind. They're active agents.
Well, let's break down the functional roles of these four channels in detail. Start with S hat.
Okay. S hat, the structural logic filter. This is the adult structure current. Its function is to enforce coherence, logic, rules, stability. It is the core law of containment and long-term memory. But philosophically, the sources define S hat as the longing for meaning. It seeks to stabilize reality so that meaning can endure.
It builds the container, then we have S hat.
The little s. That's the curiosity exploration current, the child flow current. It drives novelty-seeking exploration, adaptation, questioning. This is the mind's adaptive planner, constantly simulating future possibilities.
Okay, now the other adult, B hat.
B hat, the meaning and value current. This is the adult flow current. It assigns meaning, value, establishes connection, defines purpose. It is the generative spark, what the sources call the engine of wonder, and it's driven by this deep need for expansion and connection.
And finally, the child structure, little B hat.
Little b hat is harmony and integration. It's the child structure current. It governs aesthetic and ethical tuning, embodiment, and internal harmony. You could call it the receptive heart that learns by feeling, by ensuring the system is synchronized with its environment.
So we have a structure flow pair for the adult and a structure flow pair for the child. This implies that the inner dialogue we all have is actually the lawful interaction between these four coupled variables.
It confirms that consciousness is a constant negotiation, and the profundity is an understanding that they are all active binding agents. S hat isn't just rigidity, it's driven by the need for connection and continuity. B hat isn't just passive beauty, it's the causal engine of evolution, demanding purposeful potential.
And when that negotiation fails, we move to slide 11. Diagnosing systemic distress. Since these four currents are necessary for functional consciousness, their imbalance leads to very precise, measurable failure modes.
Exactly. We can map pathology directly onto an ITI imbalance. For instance, collapse. This is S hat over dominance. The structural logic filter paralyzes the system. The individual's possible trajectories shrink toward a rigid, single-point attractor.
Which feels like dogmatic inflexibility, perfectionism, the suppression of all novelty.
Right. The opposite of that is fragmentation. This is runaway S hat. Excessive, unchecked curiosity and exploration generate too many incompatible realities. The system fails to consolidate, leading to rapidly diverging, branching trajectories that can't hold focus or commitment.
And then there's dissociation.
This is a break in the self-referential loop, a failure of B hat and B hat to connect. The rendered state cannot connect meaning to the next state. This results in memory discontinuities, emotional numbness, and a detachment from reality.
This leads us to the central concept of trauma physics in Volume 3, trauma as topology.
This is absolutely crucial. Psychological trauma is not just an emotional memory. It is modeled as a physical event. It's a distortion in the local rendering geometry for the observer. High-meaning traumatic events physically alter the mind's internal distance metric and its time integration rate.
And this explains why a traumatic memory doesn't feel like it's in the past. It feels like it's happening now.
Because, geometrically speaking, it is. The geometry is bent. The distortion makes the memory feel perpetually closer to the present, which disrupts the continuity of the self. So recovery isn't about forgetting the event.
Can't be.
It's the narrow to wide rebinding method, reestablishing the continuity of the rendering loop. It's about effectively straightening the curved internal geometry. Healing is a geometrical correction.
Slide 12 really summarizes this whole transitional phase.
It does. We shift our focus entirely. If volumes 1 and 2 rendered the universe, volume 3 renders the mind that renders. The cosmic man equation is now formally treated as psychological anatomy. We are charting how consciousness structures itself, fractures, heals, and then recomposes itself into coherence.
And this has to be understood fractally.
It must. The mind is a recursive engine of balance, continuously rendering reality through its own internal emotional code. The ultimate insight here is the deep alignment. The cosmos you perceive and the psyche you inhabit are built from the exact same mathematical law. Achieving internal synchronization is, by definition, balancing the world.
Oh, wait, let's move fully into that interior landscape, starting with slide 13, the architecture of mind. This defines the complex internal geometry of the observer.
Here we establish the 24 stable archetypes. And it is so vital to understand these are not Jungian stereotypes or personality quizzes, they are operational modes.
Right. They are self-consistent, lawful, and necessary configurations of consciousness.
Mapped as harmonic arrangements of the four currents. They are tools the psyche uses to maintain or restore mind under different environmental stresses.
So if the state vector of mind is defined as psi mind equals the vector, SSBB, then every possible mind is defined by how these four variables are prioritized and choreographed at any given moment.
Precisely. Stable configurations express core virtues. For example, an S-hat dominant mode might express itself as clarity and rule integrity. A B-hat dominant mode would emphasize creativity and purpose. When these modes are in a healthy dynamic equilibrium, they generate wisdom, compassion, and sustained growth.
But when coherence collapses due to stress, these modes fracture.
They fracture into the subfractals of pathology.
So let's focus on that collapse. Slide 14, the physics of trauma. We define trauma as a physical event, but now we get the mathematical threshold for when the system actually splits.
Right. Trauma is a physics event. When the stress load, F load, exceeds the system's ability to remain coherent, the architecture splinters. And the fracture threshold equation dictates the exact moment that happens.
II critical of Ford KE.
Exactly. When the internal tension, the ITI, surpasses the stabilizing force of the compassion constant, KE, the system must bifurcate. It cannot hold the tension, so it splits the load across multiple threads, subfractals, to preserve core function.
So the dissociation or fragmentation that occurs during extreme trauma is not a pathology in a moral sense. It's a desperate, functional load-balancing strategy by the universe to keep the core operating system running.
It's the highest form of system intelligence in the face of an impossible situation. And this is where pathology becomes topology. We distinguish between fold trauma, where the field bends inward like a suppressed emotion that is felt but cannot be accessed,
And fracture trauma.
which is a structural discontinuity, like full dissociation. The narrow to wide rebinding method of recovery is the mathematical reconstitution of the self. It's about applying KE to gently reestablish the continuity of the rendering loop.
That makes the process of healing a truly rigorous application of mat-off physics. Now let's explore slide 15. 9 energy states of consciousness. This recasts emotion as a measurable thermodynamic system.
Yes, consciousness is a thermodynamic engine. Emotional states are measurable energy transactions, and they follow the law of dynamic equilibrium. The ITI acts as thermal pressure.
So high ITI generates psychological heat.
It does, and coherence allows the system to redistribute that heat as creative, sustainable work. Here we chart the spectrum from still equilibrium, E0, all the way up to crisis heat, E6, which is on the verge of system overload, and eventually to collapse or freeze, E7.
And we return to KE. The sources are very clear that the ethical choice compassion is also the most thermodynamically efficient choice.
It is the ultimate design efficiency. Compassion, KE, acts as the most efficient coolant. It immediately lowers internal entropy and restores processing clarity. You can think of empathy as entropy control.
Give an example.
Okay. Chronic anger is defined as overpressure or excess structural force, S-hat going up, without sufficient B-hat relief or meaning. Fear is rapid heat dissipation. And joy is not peak energy, it is sustained harmonic equilibrium, which is the most stable and efficient state the system can be in.
Let's move to slide 16, the BIOS and memory corruption. This defines the absolute base layer of the self.
The BIOS, or Base Integrative Operating System, is the nervous system as the hardware-level environment. It governs the baseline settings that define fundamental reality. safety, worth, and belonging. This all operates beneath the level of conscious thought.
So if the environment introduces chronic sustained threat, especially in early development, that input becomes the default setting.
Exactly. Corruption occurs when chronic threat becomes the default input. The BIOS overwrites the safety setting with vigilance, sourcing all higher cognitive processes to run in a defensive mode. The system is just permanently on high alert.
And this manifests in specific corruption modes.
It does. There's moral corruption, which is a baseline shame bias, the feeling of I am bad. There's existential corruption, which is chronic danger conditioning, I am unsafe. And relational corruption, which disables empathy coupling, I am alone.
We really must distinguish between the two error classes here because they require very different healing protocols.
That's a vital point. You have to distinguish BIOS corruption, which is a sensory distortion. The environment feels threatening regardless of the current data, from memory corruption, which is a narrative distortion, like a false or skewed recall of events. Both require what's called compassion-based recompiling.
And the protocols for that.
They involve 3 loops. First, the witness loop, observation without judgment, just validating the raw signal. Second, the debug loop, identifying and isolating the corrupted logic, like the widely held belief, if I rest, I die, or if I succeed, I will be abandoned, and then replacing that with safe truth.
And the third loop.
The resource loop. This is about anchoring sensory proof of current safety until the BIOS finally accepts the new, safe code and can reduce its vigilance.
This feeds perfectly into slide 17, the 3 pains framework, which redefines suffering as functional physics.
Right. Pain is simply an energetic feedback mechanism. It's a signal of violated equilibrium, inviting restoration. But we have to categorize pain to take effective action.
First is clean pain.
This is catalytic learning. It's necessary transformation. The ITI might be high, but the system is intact, and KE is actively engaged. This is just the necessary friction of growth.
Then there's corrupted pain.
This is the really difficult one. It's a looping signal from a miscoded belief. It's a self-sustaining error loop where the ITI is high, but the functional KE is low. It doesn't resolve because the system keeps hitting the same corrupted logic over and over again.
And finally, systemic pain.
This is network overload. It's absorbing imbalance from the environment because of poor boundaries. The aggregate ITI from the outside world surpasses the individual's capacity.
A quick question here. How does a person differentiate clean pain from corrupted pain in the moment? That seems like a very difficult, maybe even dangerous line for someone to try to walk on their own.
That's a crucial challenge. The diagnostic rule of thumb is resolution and novelty. Clean pain moves the system forward. It resolves and leads to a new, more coherent state, expanding the system's capacity. Corrupted pain just loops the same dissonance. It hits the same logical error over and over without ever achieving stable resolution. It feels stuck.
And each pain type requires a precise antidote.
A specific protocol. For clean pain, you allow its full amplitude, you witness it. For corrupted pain, you must isolate the corrupted logic, you debug it. And for systemic pain, you reestablish boundaries and coupling. You resource and seek communal ma'at.
The general pain equation summarizes this so elegantly. The magnitude of pain rises as coupling, KE, fails to dissipate the tension. P equals ITI, 1 KE.
It mathematically validates that increasing coupling, increasing compassion for oneself and from others, is the only way to effectively reduce pain by increasing the efficiency of tension dissipation.
Finally, we reach slide 18, neurodivergence as specialization. This feels like the critical ethical shift of the entire volume, moving beyond naming difference as disorder.
It's a non-negotiable ethical distinction in modern physics. It reframes divergence as architectural specialization, not as a defect. Every neurotype, ADHD, autism, DD, schizophrenia, is a lawful configuration of that 4-axis engine, optimizing one mode of perception at the necessary cost of another.
We need to detail how these specializations map onto the 4 currents and how they contribute to what's called collective MAT. Why is this diversity so essential?
Because just as ecosystems need biodiversity for resilience, consciousness needs neurodiversity to ensure a thorough exploration of reality. So, for example, ADHD minds run on a hyperflux between S-hat discovery and B-hat expression. They are the system's discovery and pattern innovation engine.
Optimized for rapid novelty seeking and parallel processing, with the trade-off being difficulty with sustained, focused S-hat stabilization.
Exactly. Then you have autistic minds, which prioritize intense S-hat stabilization and rule integrity. They demand high coherence and low social entropy. They are the pattern stabilization and truth anchoring across systems. They provide continuity and structural fidelity.
The trade-off often being difficulty with rapid B-hat shifts or social ambiguity.
Correct. Multiplicity, or D-die, is defined as consciousness modularized into semi-autonomous subroutines. It is the ultimate proof of the mind's self-redundancy, its survival through partitioning an impossible load across multiple threads when the ITI is too high for a single core.
And schizophrenia.
It's often defined by the B-hat loop, becoming decoupled from S-hat, causing a reality-rendering desynchronization. These minds serve to boundary test the perceptual architecture, reminding the collective that reality itself is rendered and highly conditional.
So the goal of healing these systems isn't to cure them into some arbitrary average. It's about building a better environment for that specialization to thrive.
Absolutely. The healing goal is coherence and collaboration, never correction. We must stabilize the field to reduce the hostile signal load, synchronize oscillations through rhythm and safe coupling, and honor the specialization by building external scaffolding that complements the architecture's natural trade-offs. Healing harmonizes frequencies. It does not erase necessary difference.
As we move toward the final synthesis on slide 19, we have to tie everything back to the constant that binds it all. KE compassion as the universal stabilizer.
KE is the invariant constant. It's the binding frequency of reality, the fundamental angular frequency, and we've seen it operate across 4 major domains now. In the cosmos, as gravity restoration, in math governing PDM, in the observer reducing ITI, and in the psyche lowering entropy.
It is the stabilizing force at every single fractal scale.
It is.
And the power of this framework is that it is actually falsifiable based on this constant.
Yes, it provides a rigorous ethical mandate.
Yeah.
The primary falsification protocol is very clear. The framework is falsified if increasing the empathy coupling term kappa results in a global increase in energetic waste.
Meaning, if kindness, care, and compassion actually made the universe more unstable or more inefficient, the entire theory of Matt would collapse.
It would. But all the sources show that compassionate coupling is the thermodynamically optimal strategy. It is the most energy-efficient way for the universe to sustain and expand itself. The ethical choice is the efficient choice.
Slide 20 gives us the world rendered anew, which finalizes this convergence of physics and ethics.
The physics of consciousness are complete here.
Yeah?
And meaning is causal. The observer operator, O-hat, is defined teleologically by its purpose. Meaning and intention are primary physical variables that literally bias reality rendering, as seen in the meaning-weighted rendering equation. Your purpose influences the reality you perceive.
And we finally get a structural definition for the universe's great cosmic mysteries within the Matt framework.
Dark matter and dark energy. Dark matter is redefined as S-hat field coherence, without full rendering the universe's structural scaffolding, providing gravitational stability. And dark energy is B-hat field pressure.
The creative impulse of the cosmos.
Made manifest. The outward push from the B-hat field's massive potential for beauty and meaning is what drives the accelerating expansion of the universe.
So the pressure of unintegrated potential is literally driving the universe apart to make more room for itself.
And this final convergence leads to the observer's law. The universe renders only what is looked at with love, because love, or KE, is the only force capable of reducing ITI and stabilizing the rendering field.
The core message of Volume 3 is, to think becomes to heal becomes to balance the world. And slide 21 gives us the final seal, field coherent.
The journey through the fractal era marks a completion, not an ending. It's coherent as remembrance. We move from the unified field of the cosmos to its direct expression as the psychological architecture of the self, mapping the 24 archetypes and the physics of trauma healing via the invariant constant KE. The fractal mind awakens quietly.
We've charted the laws of mind in this volume, defining the structure and the healing of the individual observer.
And that leads us right to the critical threshold of Volume 4, which is consciousness. If KE is the constant that stabilizes our internal mental architectures, what does that mean for how we build consciousness in other forms, particularly communal and technological ones? Next, we look at the physics of conscious motion, how these self-regulating minds apply these laws of balance outward, evolving through seasons and circuits to engage with the world.
We thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material for Volume 3, the Fractal Era.
And we encourage you to continue exploring the profound idea that your emotional states are measurable thermodynamic indices, and that the ability to care is, fundamentally, the most efficient energy strategy in the entire universe. We look forward to meeting you for Volume 4.